Я всех приветствую на нашем курсе традиционном, уже ставшем традиционным, технологическое предпринимательство в космической сфере. Это третья лекция. Лекция, посвященная инновациям и предпринимательству в космической сфере. И к нам приехал наш дорогой друг Эдвард Кроули, президент Сколтеха и человек, который очень много времени в своей жизни отдал космосу. Ну, я думаю, он лучше меня расскажет. Эдвард, вам слово. Спасибо, что приехали.
Спасибо. So good evening. Thank you. You'll have to forgive me that I'm have a sore throat this evening, so I'll be a little brief in my words. So almost all entrepreneurs start by telling their life story. So I'll tell you a little bit of my life story, because it really has three parts. It has a part which is decades. So in the 1990s, I started a program at MIT called System Design and Management. Then I started a program a few years later in the Aero-Astro department on undergraduate education. Then I started a program called CDIO, which is now an international program of improving universities working together to improve engineering education. I realized I left off the International Space University, now in Strasbourg, France. Then about here, there's the Gordon program on engineering leadership. And now there's SkyTech. So these are educational programs that I've started. Then there's companies that I've started. There's, let's see, ACX. ACX is stands for Active Control Expert. And it was about applying the technology that we developed from NASA for optical systems in space to systems on the Earth. And we sold this company to a company called Cymer that manufactures semiconductor manufacturing equipment. So the problems of optical control in space and the problems of optical control in semiconductor manufacturing, photolithography, are very similar. So the second company that we started was about here, called bioscale.com. You can look that up. And this company was started with a license from a national laboratory based on a microelectronic mechanical device, MEMS. And it now builds the world's most sensitive detector for proteins, right? But inside the device is another vibrating controlled membrane, and we measure the change in mass of this membrane by the change in the frequency of the resonance, right? So we can get 1 part in 10 to the minus 7 change in frequency we can measure. So then there was a company called Carrot, which is a company I started with my wife, that does financial management and investing. Then there's a company called DataZoo, which you can find online, datazoo.com. And this company takes an algorithm that we developed to explore space, to design space missions, which is a combination of decision theory and machine learning. And it applies it to the problem of choosing the advertisement to put in front of you when you go to a website. You may know when you call for cars.com that the page comes up in about 100 milliseconds. And in the first 20 milliseconds, there's actually an online auction to bid for the right to put an ad in front of you. And we're one of the companies that participates in buying in that auction. Millions of bids per minute. And we collect and store all of the information that's available about you on the internet in order to optimize the bid for the advertisement. All based on an algorithm developed for NASA. Then the last company is called Ecotrope. And Ecotrope is a company that chooses what type of walls and windows and doors and foundation you would put in a building in order to maximize the return on investment for energy costs. Right? So, for example, if we had a very thin wall, it would be inexpensive to build, but we'd lose a lot of heat. We add some thickness to the wall becomes more expensive, we lose less heat. We make the wall more expensive, the wall thicker, it becomes more expensive, but we lose less heat still. Where's the optimum? Based on the next 20 years of energy costs for the building. Based on a different algorithm developed for NASA for the design of spacecraft. So, not counting Carrot, 4 companies, none of them have anything to do with space. But all of them are developed based on technologies that were invented for space. Then the third thing is space. So way back here, I was a student and a professor. And let's see, about here, I started coming to Moscow, to Mai. Then by here, we have the Clinton Space Station Commission. So this was the commission that recommended to President Clinton that we try to bring together the Russian and American space station programs that produced the so-called International Space Station. Right? So I was a member of this commission. Then I was the head of Aero and Astro at MIT. And then here we have the Obama Space Commission, where we recommended to retire the shuttle, build a new missile, build a new rocket launcher, and prepare to go to Mars. And someplace in here I left off Orbital Sciences Corporation. where I became a member of the Board of Trustees. And this is about the sixth largest space company in the U.S., about $1.5 billion a year of spacecraft and rockets. So a few things you notice. One is I like to start things, right? In education, I started 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things. In industry, I started 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. So I call Skotech my 11th startup. Right. So what have I learned in this life? One, it's really easy to start things. Two, it's really hard to start things in space. Right. Space is about the most difficult area, maybe along with nuclear, to start new ventures. Okay. The other thing I've learned, I think, is a little bit about how to start things. And I would say that there are about 3 views of how to train young people to be entrepreneurs. And most of my remarks tonight are aimed at the young people, excuse me. Oh, you're still a young people, okay. We're all young. We're all young, good, I like that. I would say that for many years, we taught people a model of entrepreneurship which is mostly wrong. Okay. And it's a model that says that the first thing you do is write a plan, the business plan. And you try to build your company based on this plan. And I think that this is a model which was created by people who understand how big companies work, who are trying to explain how new companies work. You have to write a business plan, but don't ever do what you say to do that you're going to do in the business plan. It's almost certain to lead to failure. So there's this guy, my good friend, whose name I keep forgetting, that's why I'm checking. Steve Blank. Have you heard Steve Blank? Yeah, he was in Moscow, I think, about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. I strongly recommend that you read his work, even though he's from Stanford. And I think he has a much more correct, a much more true view of how companies start, new companies start. And it basically is the idea that starting a company is a little like an experiment or a series of experiments, right? Did he give this lecture? Yeah. That you make some assumptions, some postulate, and you collect some information to test it. And then, based on your results, you make some more decisions and some more postulates. So it's sort of a set of experiments, of testing. I think, to me, this makes much more sense than the old model. So go and read some things by Steve Blank. He's written 3 or 4 books. He has some very good YouTube videos. So then there's the third way of thinking about it, which I would say is the way I think about it, which I'm going to talk about tonight. And other people think this way too. And the basic difference is that Steve Blank tells you what to do. And I like to think about who you need to be. Who do you need to be a successful entrepreneur? All right? What's in here? What's in here? What's in here? Right? Because you need all of these. You need a good head, and you need a good heart, and you need a lot of muscle, right, to be a good entrepreneur. So let me talk about this. And the theme that I talk about is actually not entrepreneurship, it's leadership. Right? Because an entrepreneur is a technical business leader. Right? So let's talk about leadership. So first, what does the word mean? So without having a long debate, I'll give you a standard definition of leadership. It's a reciprocal relationship between an individual and a group where the leader exerts influence to accomplish shared objectives, dealing with change or transformation. Now, I say this, this is important to start, because most students actually don't understand this. You see, real leadership is when you don't have control. Real leadership is exerting influence without control. Right? So you want to think about how you're going to influence people around you. Okay, so now I'm going to stop in each one of these and say, if we were starting a space company, what would this mean? Who's the group? So this is going to be a discussion, so please answer. The staff, right? That's one group. And what other groups are there? For
Engineers, maybe.
the customers, well, the engineers would be the staff. So we have the staff, the customers,
And organizers of this event, of this company.
the organizer. Who's the organizer? You're the organizer. You're the leader. The shareholders, the investors,
Government.
and perhaps the government.
Officials could give money.
Right, and perhaps the government officials, right? So it isn't just one group that you have to be the leader of. You have to think about your team. You have to think about your investors. You have to think about your customers. You have to think about the government who might invest or might regulate, okay? So you're the individual, and what kind of influence do you create?
You gather these people together.
You gather them together. You inspire them. You motivate them. And you guide their technical and business decisions. Right? And what's the change that you're trying to bring about? You're trying to change the world.
Make it a better place.
And make it a better place. That's in the big view.
You try to establish something new which never existed.
You're trying to create something new, right? And maybe make some money, hopefully. Okay, so it's reciprocal influence to accomplish shared objectives. Shared objectives, the shared objectives with the team are to produce something and make money. The shared objectives with the investors are to make money for them. The shared objectives for the customers is to give them something new, something they haven't had, right? And it's about change or transformation. So what's the difference between management and leadership? So you can go to this great university in Сколково called the Сколково Business School, Школа управления. I think I already said that. And you, what do they teach you at the business school, or at most business schools? They teach you management. Right? Management is keeping very complex organizations running well. Right? Leadership is starting something new. So I like to think that management is keeping the trains running on time. Leadership is making new track to go to new places. Right? So if you want to be an entrepreneur, you have to be a leader. You have to be prepared to make new tracks, not just keep the trains running. Right? And this old model of entrepreneurship was this model based on the idea of keeping the trains running, that you can write a plan for the next few years in a company that's never existed before. Okay, what's an engineer? This is my old school MIT. What's an engineer? What does an engineer do?
Engineers developing new technique, devices.
Right. So engineers create something new. What do scientists do? They do research, but what kind of research? What's the outcome of their research? Ideas for engineers.
And new ways to create new
No.
vehicles.
No. Scientists don't create anything new.
But they give
They discover something. You see, until 100 years ago, at least in English, the word for science was natural history. They discover the history of nature. Right? Science is about finding things that have always been. Engineers create things that never were. It's a very clear distinction. Right? So, von Karman, my great-grandfather, said this. He's not really my great-grandfather. He was the thesis supervisor of the thesis supervisor of my thesis supervisor. Right? So he's my academic great-grandfather. My academic grandfather is a guy named Sen. C.C. Sen. Anyone ever heard of him? He created the ballistic missile program of the People's Republic of China. And von Karman helped create the ballistic missile program of the U.S. So in my family tree, I have 2 ballistic missile programs. So the engineering experience is one of design, innovation, imagination, and contribution. It helps to shape the future. So this is what we try to do as an entrepreneur, as a leader. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes tonight about this model, about which I call the 4 capabilities model. It's one of my colleagues developed this. And the first important part of this is what's in here. Because if we don't have the right values, if we don't have the right attitudes, then everything else will be wasted. So let me tell you what I think these are. The first 2 are the things that make entrepreneurs entrepreneurs. Right? They're willing to take initiative. And they're willing to make decisions with almost no information. Right? Because innovation means making something new. Innovation, nov. The word nov means new, right, in Latin. So making new things is by definition taking risk. If you don't want to take risk, don't be an entrepreneur. You have to feel ready to take risks. Whoops. And you have to have a lot of this, right? You have to be willing to deliver, to work all day and all night and all weekend and all vacation. Because in the first few months and years of a company, you have to keep on schedule. You have to get to market. And that just takes this enormous will, this force to do it. Go and read books about writing business plans. They never talk about risk or will, right? This is who you have to be. And you have to be courageous, right? And you have to act ethically. You have to do the right thing. You have to trust and be loyal to your team. These are really important things for an engineer leader. You have to be really good at working with other people. Because a small team at the beginning of a company is like a family, right? And we teach students in universities communication. But what we really teach them is what I'm doing now, which is broadcast, right? Lecturing, writing, right? The thing that we don't teach anywhere near enough is listening and trying to understand. If you walk around and follow an engineer or an entrepreneur in a company and watch what they do hour by hour, they spend remarkably little time doing this. What they do is they spend time talking to people, talking with staff, talking with suppliers, talking with investors, talking with customers. You have to be very effective at listening. Particularly the worst people, who are the worst listeners, professors. Right? Because professors never have to listen to anyone. You know, they just broadcast to their students. So as a student, you actually don't have good role models of people who want to be good listeners. So this is listening, inquiry and dialogue, negotiation, compromise, advocating, working in diverse groups. You know, you have to learn to work with different kinds of people. Interpersonal skills, structured communication, that's things like. Okay, now we really get to leadership. About 2 months ago, President Medvedev announced open government process. Right? And he created a set of groups, I don't know quite how many, does anyone know? I think maybe 8 or 10 groups on different topics. And they had subgroups. And he wanted to hear lots of opinion about what the government should do in the next government. This was excuse me. This was sense making. This was, we now have the opportunity to make a new government. So what ideas can we bring? What facts can we discover that will help us build a better government? I actually got to participate in one of these meetings. It was fabulous. Okay? So making sense is a very important thing to do when you're a leader, especially when you're a new leader. What is there around you? How do people connect? What are the important ideas? What are the important facts? Right? So when you get to a new situation, start noticing how important it is to just stop at the beginning and make sense. One of my mentors in life was, how do you say mentor? That's not quite mentor, that's spiritual leader. A mentor is like a senior advisor. Nastavnik, yeah. one of my mentors in life was a president of MIT. And he told me that when he got to MIT, for the first month, all he did was have people come into his office one by one and tell them about the issues of MIT. He spent an entire month just collecting views of MIT. He was making sense of MIT. He'd never worked there. So when you get to a new situation, stop and make sense. What do engineers make sense of? They make sense of society and the natural context, nature. They try to understand what their customers need. They try and understand about the organization they're in. And they try and understand about new technology. Right? Entrepreneurs are always watching for new technology. Right? Because when a new piece of technology comes up, or you invent it, then you start to say, how could I use this? Right? The next thing leaders do, is they make visions. And the great leaders have made great visions. Right? And you can think about some of the people in your life or in history who have created great visions of the future. They can be political leaders, they can be moral leaders, they can be business leaders. So who do you think of as business leaders now who are able to make great visions? Who would come to mind? Vexelberg. I'll tell him you said that. Steve Jobs. Almost everybody says this. Right? If you want to look at a business leader who has unfortunately just died, but if you want to look at a recent business leader who basically absolutely created a vision of the business he was in, Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs said, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. All right? You want to predict the future? Invent it. All right? That's the way a person who creates visions think. All right? So what do engineering leaders create visions of? They create technical visions. Right? They create visions of new products and visions of new services. Right? You know, you have to think back. See, you're getting bored and you're all using this, right? Sorry, I'm making you bored. So, you know, it's fairly easy now to think, I have a 4S. What's the vision of a 5? But what was it like to make the vision of the first cell phone? You know, there was a time, we remember, but we're still young. There was a time when we didn't have cell phones. Does anyone believe that?
I believe in it.
Yeah, you see, but it's hard for you to imagine. Right? You know the definition of technology? Technology is things that were invented after you were born. Right? Because if it was invented before you're born, it's just always been there. I mean, none of us think of automobiles as technology. They've always been there. Right? So the really challenging visions are not to create the ones, you know, the next Vkонтакте. Right? We've already got Vkонтакте, we've already got Facebook, we've already got LinkedIn, we've already got a lot of them, right? I can't keep track of all of them that I'm on. Right? The challenge is to create the visions of the next type of thing that will be on the web. Right? That's visioning. And then more of this, more of delivering, of actually making the thing work. And I'll tell you, this is the really hard part. You know, pulling together the team, relating to people, that's always going on. Making sense, sometimes you can do it in a few days, a few weeks, a few months. Creating a vision, when you have it, you have it. But delivering. And delivering something that works. And delivering something that works every time. And delivering something that works every time, all the time. Even when it's too hot, or too cold, or the pressure is too high, or the material is not as strong as it should be. And delivering it inexpensively, on schedule. You know, a lot of entrepreneurs are really good at making the prototype. But the real heart of making a successful business is making the prototype really work, and inexpensively, and so that it works well. Right? When we launch satellites into space, we only get one chance. If the launch goes wrong, if the satellite doesn't work, right? This isn't like software. You know, if the software doesn't work, you reboot. Right? You can't reboot a rocket. You only get one chance. And often the thing on the top of the rocket cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Right? One chance. It's got to work really well every time. In the entire history of the last century, the highest launch rate reliability was achieved by the Semyorka. 98.5%. Amazing record.
Rolex.
The Rolex? The Rolex of rockets, right? Yeah. So delivering on the vision. We have to be able to invent new things, we have to build new things, and we have to implement and operate them well. Okay, now I'm tiring out the переводчик. So we're going to take a little break, and when we come back, we're going to try to apply this to space. Right? So we're actually going to invent something tonight. Ready? So start thinking during the break of what you have to make sense of. What vision can we have, and what plan can we make for delivering on the vision? So I'm serious. By the end of tonight, we'll invent a new product for space. Maybe several. Okay? So now we're going to invent a company. So we'll assume that we back in the old days when we had chalk, I used to throw chalk, you know. People in the back making noise. Okay, so now we know what leadership is, right? Leadership is between an individual and group, exerting influence toward shared objectives, often bringing about change. We know what engineering is, making new things. This evening, I won't be able to convince you of anything on this page or this page. This is things you have to learn to believe, or you have to believe. But I do want to point out one more time how important this is. How important this is. That if you want to be an entrepreneur, You really do have to be prepared to take risks. So let's start there. How do you learn that it's safe to take risks? Practice. Right. There's no way to do this without practicing. And I believe that one of the features of a good educational system is that you let students take risks and practice and be successful. I don't know, how many of you have been in the Army? Yeah, that's all right. There's a few guys who've been in the Army. You know, actually, you may like the Army, you may not like the Army. But if you go and look at how the Army trains young soldiers, they give them a test, right? Some task that just is very difficult, but they're just barely able to do it. And then the next day, they give them some other task, which is a little more hard, more difficult. And they're just barely able to do it. And day after day, the young soldiers work very hard at more and more and more difficult tasks. But almost all the time, they succeed. Right? Because the Army wants confident soldiers. Right? Wants soldiers who believe that they can win in a fight. See, so training people to be entrepreneurs is a little like training people in the Army. You want to take on more and more difficult jobs that always challenge you, but that you're probably going to succeed at if you work really hard. And that success will cause you to be willing to take on the next most difficult job. All right? So I just took on this very difficult startup job. Number 11. Right? I wouldn't have taken this job if I hadn't done 5 of these and 5 of these. If all I had ever been was a professor giving lectures, I would never have taken on the task of starting a new university in a foreign country. Right? But having all that practice, I said, well, I'll try it. Okay, so that's this. Okay, now we get down to real work. Oh, I'm sorry, relating. It's important to relate to people. This is something else you just work on your whole life. It really is important. The last time I was at NASA headquarters, I was walking out of the building with the NASA administrator, Marine Corps General, retired. And he stopped at every person on the way out of the building and talked to them, including the man who was cleaning the floor. Right? Here is a man who can relate to people. Every person he stopped and talked. He didn't have to do that. He's the administrator. The boss of NASA, and an astronaut, flown 6 times in space. So this is something we can all work on. How to relate more effectively, how to listen to people, how to make them know that we're concerned about them. Okay, so here's where the real inventing the company starts. So we're going to invent a company that has to do with space. What context do we have to understand? Context, that things that are surround us, the information, the facts, the people. What are the most important 2 or 3 elements of context that we have to think about? I'm sorry?
Needs of consumers.
Okay. The needs of consumers. Okay.
Our staff.
Our staff.
What can we do actually?
Our,
Our abilities.
What
That-
type of people are we going to involve
Okay.
in this company?
our abilities.
Our vision to this new company.
We don't have the vision yet. We're studying context, right? So this incredibly simple chart. I was in business for about 15 years before I really understood this. That basically, the two things that you have to understand when you try to start any company is what can technology allow us to do? And what does the market need? Right? Now, you don't have to have this. There are lots of very successful companies that make money every year by putting no new technology at all into things. People who make soap, people who make food, right? There's no technology in those things. And if you work for a company that makes soap, let's say soap for washing dishes, a new product is a different color bottle. It's true. Or a new smell in the soap. Or a new shape of bottle. Right? Those are new products. But we don't do those things in space, right? But we have to understand what the product, what the market is. We have to understand what the technology is. And in particular, you can imagine that just about every successful new product either has some understanding of the market which is new, or some understanding of a technology which is new. Right? It has to have one or the other of those to be a successful entrepreneur. Okay, so needs is the market, and abilities, part of abilities is technology. One more thing about technology. Don't put more than one new technology in a product. When you're building a new product, you spend a large amount of your effort making the one new technology work. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. You put two new technologies in a product, it becomes very difficult. If possible, one new technology. Okay, so what market are we going to address? How are we going to make sense of the market? Here's the space market. What does it consist of?
Ministries of some countries.
No. What's the products? Rockets, satellites, software. Who said that? Yeah, software. Signal? Yeah, signals, right?
Control systems.
TV broadcast? Yeah, radio signals. So the first thing you want to understand when you look at a market is how big it is and what fraction of the total market it is. Right? So if we look at the world market for space, how big is the market for rockets? Where's the next line? Is it here? Is it here?
Maybe just below.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a handful of percent. I don't know exactly, but approximately. So this is rockets. What's the market for satellites?
Satellites from 10 to 15 maybe.
Yeah, it's sort of like that. It's bigger than rockets, 2 times. You know these numbers. You're cheating. What's the number for ground segments? It's about something like that. Okay. And what's all the rest of this?
Services.
Services.
Signals.
Yeah, signal services. TV, broadcast, radio, phone, navigation, right? It's basically RF or software. You can think about it either way, services. So this part in some countries is called upstream. And this part would be called downstream. So let me give you a little example. The company that I was on the board of till very recently, Orbital Sciences Corporation, the world's leading producer of small satellites, not little tiny, not microsatellites, but small satellites, and small to medium-sized rockets. So it has a share of the rockets, and it has a share of the satellites. Right? So at one point, this company had 4 divisions: satellites, rockets, GPS, receivers, and photographic services for space. So we sold this, and we sold this, and we kept these. And now the value of this company is around $1 billion. The value of this company is around $5 billion. The value of this company is around $3 billion. So we sold $8 billion of companies, and we kept the rockets and spacecraft. That wasn't a very smart business decision. We should have sold the rockets and spacecraft and kept the GPS and the photo services. This is I can't remember the names of what the companies are called now. So when you think about space, don't only think about this part. Think about that part. And if I were to say, if we looked at this 10 years ago, which part of this is growing more quickly?
Maybe services.
You think this part or this part? This one. Yeah. Because 10 years ago, you didn't have a GPS receiver in your phone. You didn't have a GPS receiver in your car. The only people who had GPS receivers were aircraft and missiles. Now everyone has a few GPSs. Right? Soon you'll have a GPS in everything. Right? Whereas the number of rocket launches, it's actually going down. Right? The number of spacecraft built, more or less constant. So I'm not telling you what to do, but I'm telling you those are the facts. Now, there's another whole market here, which is you take, as we did here, you take the technology from this and you take it to a completely different market. Right? And there's nothing wrong with that. Right? It's fun to be in the space business, but it's very difficult and takes a lot of time. These are large capital expense businesses. It takes a lot of capital to enter these. So if you're an entrepreneur, there's a set of rules. Right? Here are the rules. Profit within 3 to 4 years. Capital, much less than $100 million. Team, less than 100. Market, big and growing. So when I write a business plan and I'm trying to raise venture capital, I have to be able to say all these things. Big market and growing. Can do it with my team. Don't need much money. We'll get profitable within 3 to 4 years. If you can say those things, you have a chance of raising venture capital money. If you can't say those things, it's very difficult. All right? So, for example, this company took a technology from space, applied it to buildings. First product, 6 months. Total amount of money in order to get to break even, $5 million. 10 people, $3 billion market. $3 billion. Software as a service. So that's the sort of deal that the venture capitalists are used to looking at. So now, let's create a vision. I don't want to make it sound like this is impossible, because it's not. Oh, by the way, this company, 28 years old, was started by a classmate of mine from MIT as a startup 28 years ago. Now it's $1.5 billion. Well, so, but these are realities, right? So let's try and create a vision. Oh, I should have said this. This is another useful thing. That these are the two sources of wisdom, from the technology, from the market. If you look at the pattern of successful teams that start companies, 3 people. That's the most successful team size. Okay? One of which is a businessman, knows how to raise money, knows how to run a company, knows how to make deals, knows how to read contracts. Right? One of whom is a market leader, because that's the person who understands this. And one of whom is an engineering leader, because that's the person who understands this. So if you think about the team you want to have start, the most successful team size is 3. There's another thing about teams of 3 people. You try to start a company by yourself, who do you discuss the problems with? No one. You try to start a person with 2 people, right? That's called marriage. Right? Because in marriage, both people have to agree, or there's no other solution. Otherwise, it's called divorce. Right? 3 people is the smallest number of people that can come to a consensus. to a vote. Right? So if you have about 3 people in a company and you sit around for a difficult decision, you're more likely to be able to come to a solution. So there's a lot of good research by a colleague of mine at MIT that says this is about the right size. Right? Okay, so now this is the hard part. Let's create a vision. Let's try and think of a way to make a new space company. So, any ideas? Oh, you have an idea. Okay. Okay. This is gonna be brainstorming. I'm gonna write down all the ideas.
I have an idea of making company for broadcasting radio from
Ah, okay. Broadcast radio. Okay.
satellite radio.
Satellite radio. Right. Right. Who's got another one?
Well, how about small launch vehicles for maybe space funerals?
Small launch vehicles for funerals. Very interesting idea. I'll come back and talk about that one. Who's got another idea? Пожалуйста.
To put together the power of GPS communication,
GLONASS.
GLONASS system,
Да-да.
in order to increase precision of computation and engineering solutions on the ground.
And what's the Chinese system named?
Как китайский называется?
Compass? And Galileo. And some other ones. Okay? Not only precision, but reliability.
Another one. You know, atomic oxygen, Earth's atmosphere,
Mhm.
lithography by using atomic oxygen.
Lithography with atomic oxygen. Well, I guess there's atomic oxygen, so it's just O.
To launch garbage containers to space.
Garbage. Okay. Garbage containers.
Containers, yes.
Можно еще один? Слежение за астероидами в ближнем и дальнем космосе.
To watch out for the asteroids in the near
Ah.
space and the remote space. They call them asteroids.
Okay.
И еще один обработка изображений
Process the picture, the image,
для и регионов, и
for the provinces.
пожаров и прочее.
Регионов чего еще?
И пожаров, и
Watch
наводнений.
out for the floods and fires in different provincial geographies. Probably he means not
Yeah.
away from
So
the
it's actually to process the image,
process, yes.
not to take the image. Yeah, yeah.
Не фотографировать, а
Yeah.
обрабатывать изображение.
Energy from space.
Энергия из космоса.
Robotics for space garbage collection.
As a seminars probably.
Space garbage collection.
Сбор космического мусора.
Okay.
Создание транспортных интеллектуальных систем.
The transport intellectual systems. I don't know what he means.
What do you mean?
Что вы имеете в виду?
Ну, сейчас, например, очень, так сказать, актуальная тема создания именно систем управления транспортом, ну, опасными грузами,
Traffic
там,
management,
пассажирским
public
транспортом и
transport,
так далее.
like buses, trolleybuses, trams. City transit system management from the space.
Создание станции.
Question of the orbital
Ну, в
station.
смысле, космодром, не в
To
плане
create
работы, а
the
в плане...
cosmodrome, you know, how do you call the place from where to launch the spacecraft?
Ah.
Oh, to launch the spacecraft
From the
space,
from-
from some platform
Yeah.
on the orbit. It's like intermediate.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
Okay. Satellite system for natural fires monitoring.
Fires.
Мониторинга пожаров.
Yeah, that's, I think, a similar idea to this.
Похожая идея к этой.
Okay. Oh, one more.
A network of constantly flying planes powered by solar batteries, monitoring the surface of the Earth constantly in online, controlled by from space, from satellites. This may be used by Google or something like that, like Google Earth.
Maybe something down to earth, like, I think something like that has been already created, but probably GPS tracking of children, something like that.
GPS tracking of children. Okay. So let's stop there. See, that's not a short, there's many ideas here. And I'm not going to say that any of these ideas are good or not, because if I say something is not good, that guarantees that someone will make money on it next year. But what I want you to think about is the tests. Excuse me. Where are the ideas here? Right? Are they in a segment that's growing or a segment that's constant or getting smaller? They're all different segments. Right. See, everyone is in a different one. So this isn't on here. This is down in here. Right? This is a new market. There is no system of long-term flying airplanes to make measurements that are controlled from space, right? That I know of. So this is a new market, right? And new markets are either very good or very bad. If you get a new market which turns out to be successful, then you're the first one there, and you can have lots of opportunity. Broadcast radio. See, that's here. Right? There already is broadcast radio in some countries, but not in Russia, right? Russia's a vast country. Lots of opportunities to have radio services. 145 million potential subscribers. Longest railway? Yeah. Image processing from space to detect fires or floods. See, that's in here. That's a post-processing service. That's taking information that already exists in photographs and refining the information until you can successfully predict something. Near-Earth asteroids. It's a little bit, if you built a new satellite, the cost of building the satellite and launching the satellite would be here. But the real value produced by this is actually down in here, right? But it's really down here because there really is no service right now. It's a new market. There's no product that exists, to my knowledge, of the systematic detection of near-Earth asteroids or Earth-crossing asteroids, right? By the way, are you more likely to die by being hit by lightning? This is true for America. We don't have much lightning in Russia, right? in America, are you more likely to be die by being hit by lightning or an asteroid?
I think the opportunity is the same.
Well, you see, you can calculate this. Right? How many people are killed by lightning every year in the U.S.? No reason why you'd know this. About 100. About 100. Yeah. Mostly hikers on mountains and guys playing golf. Because they have this big metal rod and their feet are on the ground. Right? So the lightning comes along, and occasionally farmers. So about 100 people a year. So how many people a year are killed by asteroids?
From 8 to 9 maybe.
No, none.
8.
None. No, nobody's killed by an asteroid. Except every 100 million years, everyone on the planet is killed by an astronaut. Right? About every 100 million years. So how many people on the planet?
7 billion.
7 billion. So 7 billion divided by 100 million. It's about 70, right? So it's about the same to be hit by lightning or hit by an asteroid. Except when we hit it by an asteroid, everyone's killed. So it's a pretty serious thing. Right? It would be a bad day if we were hit by an asteroid. A big one. If the where was the asteroid that came down in Siberia? Tunguska. Meteorite. Tunguska. I mean, if that had hit Moscow, it would have destroyed most of the city. Right? But it hit in Siberia. Okay, so you see, the thing to do is to think about these. Think about these, and where are they? Now, let's think about the other part. So we've done the market. We haven't really done it, but we've thought about it. You have a vision. You test it against the market. Is there a big market? Satellite radio, total addressable market, 145 million people in Russia. Big market. Size of the market for burial in space? Several dozen per year. But it is true that in a study done by NASA in about 1990, looking at the ways to increase this traffic into space in order to reduce the cost of launch, one of the major potential ways to expand launch into space is with burial, because the risks are low. They're already dead. Right? So now what about the technology? This is the last discussion, and we can go home. So let's just take a few. Small launchers for funerals. Do we have the technology? Do you know about the technology for this more than the next guy? I'm just going to try and do the same ones. Broadcast radio. Do you know more about the technology of this than the next company or the next people who are starting this? You always have to think, when you're starting a company, that in Shanghai and in Bangalore and Boston and San Francisco, smart people are starting the same company. Right? There are smart young people all over the world. So you want to make sure that you know more about starting this company than most other people. Right? And the easiest way in our business to be sure of that is that you know something special about technology. Right? That's why we're scientists and engineers, because we're interested in science and technology. Right? How about near-Earth asteroids? Now, if I had just done my doctoral thesis on imaging processing algorithms for the detection of near-Earth asteroids, I might know more than most other people. But I don't, today, know anything more than anyone else. So, you know, if you know something about this, then you might be able to use a technology advantage. Image processing. Image processing, very broad field, very mathematical. If you've recently been working on an algorithm that helps identify small signal changes in large amounts of data, then you might know something that will allow you to build an image processing, a fire detector from space. Right? This is a signal detection problem. Can you find the signal in a large amount of data that may be noisy? Right? It's a very common signal detection problem. And the question is, do you have knowledge of some algorithm that would help there? So you see, this is the thought process you go through. Is, do I know something about the technology that I can use that most other people don't know? Do I have a vision of a market that is large enough to be interesting? So now let me just, to finish, go back through these companies again. Right? Technology developed in my laboratory at MIT for vibration control. 8 years of work. Very high level of technology applied to space optical systems. Okay? So we had this. And then we looked around, and it took us about 4 years, because we didn't understand this picture quite so clearly. It took us 4 years to find the application on Earth that would really make this a profitable business, making semiconductors. And as soon as we found that, within 1 year we sold the company. Pretty good. Bioscale. Piece of technology, licensed. That is to say, it was produced in a national laboratory, and we bought the license from them. Market. In general, we knew that the market was biological particles, we could say. DNA, proteins, and so forth. But it actually has taken us about 7 years to identify exactly what biomarkers this system is useful to apply to. Skip carrot. Data zoo. Technology developed in my lab on decision algorithms. This time, we're much more careful about and quick about defining the market. And in 6 months, we identified 2 options. The online internet advertisement placement, and one having to do with financial transactions. On April 1st, 2008, we made the decision to do internet advertising. that summer was the financial meltdown. If we had chosen the other one, company would be gone. we Luckily, we made the right choice. And this one, we still don't know. Still too early. So, if it's one thing you think about from this lecture tonight, thinking about making sense of this diagram. What's the technology I understand better than anyone else in the world? And who can I work with who understands the markets better than anyone in the world? Because you have to have these two things connected to make a successful company. And in space, it's hard but doable. Questions? Excuse me.
Большое спасибо, Эдвард. Мы переходим к вопросам. Есть у кого-нибудь вопросы? Тогда его первым задам я. Эдвард, вот было известно, что... Русский будете учить?
Да, пожалуйста.
Было известно, что 20-30 лет назад люди, которые работали в ракетной отрасли в России, в СССР, они ходят, может быть, байки, что это были люди, которые могли работать там 3 суток подряд, у них была железная рука. Можно ли сказать, что предприниматели, это люди в этом смысле мягче или нет? Или они тоже должны быть с твердой рукой?
Well, there's two views on what constitutes entrepreneurship. One is that entrepreneurship is always associated with starting a new company. So clearly in those Soviet companies, nobody was starting a new company, very few. Right. But the other view of entrepreneurship is that it's about bringing about a new product. It's the energy and the risk taking to bring about a new product, but even within an existing company. And I would say in that era, there was a lot of that. I mean, there was a lot of taking risk in the early period of the space program, because people were allowed to fail. You know, it was all a big experiment. And we came very close on both sides to failing many, many more times than we did. So in that regard, that regime actually was very entrepreneurial, because they were taking risks and they were building new things, but they weren't building new companies and they weren't making money. So it all depends a little on your view of what's entrepreneurship.
Да, пожалуйста.
Здесь много русских, поэтому я по-русски. Вы участник кампании по созданию Международной космической станции. В комиссии, да. Скажите, а для чего были потрачены эти почти 200 миллиардов долларов, если уже станция «Мир» 12 лет пролетала? Что нового you have learned, or Americans learned from the international space stations? Because all the lessons have been already learned. Maybe better, it's maybe the question from my side. Maybe it will be better to come back on the moon, which is our natural satellite, and start to work there compared to repeat the same lessons which is Russians already learned.
Well, it's a complex question, but the the simple answer is nobody has enough money to go to the moon. That's what we found in this study. No single country has enough money to go to the moon. If you think about what you have to build to bring humans to the moon, you have to build a rocket larger than any rocket we have. You have to build a capsule that can keep people in space for weeks, at least at a time, and re-enter with hyperorbital velocity. You have to be able to build a lander, and you have to be able to build some infrastructure, some means of working on the surface. The United States doesn't have enough money to do that. Russia doesn't have enough money to do that. China doesn't have enough money to do that. So if you take the long view, you would say that the main thing we learned in the International Space Station was how to work together, so that we're now prepared to actually launch or begin a program of going away from the Earth that's truly international, based on the experience of working in low Earth orbit.
You know that this NASA doesn't accept non-American citizen in their programs.
And so far, I haven't been hired by the Russian space program either.
Do you believe that is?
You know, I'm a doctor of spaceology, you know.
And you believe that is exists even probability to work together between?
I do. I believe it. Я верующий человек. A few more questions. I have to say my voice is just about ended.
Thank you so much for everything. It was just brilliant. And I just wanted to ask you, you told that 3 people in the team is okay. And what do you think? Is it supposed to be, there's supposed to be the same, voting rights for those people who are in the team?
The same.
I mean,
Voting.
those who for
voting
decision
rights.
making in the team.
Yeah.
Or there's supposed to be some leader who decides for everybody.
In a team of 3, especially in an entrepreneurial team, the most common thing is that you make all decisions by consensus. That is, you talk about them until you all agree. Votes are good for hundreds of people and thousands and millions, but they aren't very good ways to make decisions with 3 or 5 or 8 people. I've been on the boards of 6 or 7 corporations for, on average, 8 years. So 48 years of serving on corporate boards total. And I have never participated in a vote which was not unanimous. Right? So in small groups, the real decision process is you talk and you talk and you talk until one answer becomes relatively obvious. And then you do that. One more question.
Oh, thank you very much for the lecture. It was rather interesting. And I would like to ask you a question about leadership. What do you think about it, like equality, as equality? You said that people in business schools are taught to be managers, and can they be taught as leaderships in some kinds of business schools, or leadership is some kind of inequality given by nature, and it can be taught? What do you think about it?
No, I think you're absolutely on the right point. Is actually there's a great deal of scholarship. that says that leadership is actually the result of formative experience and not inner self. So that you can train, you can educate people to be better leaders. Unquestionably true. And good business schools, I would say, actually do this. They have components of the education which are about leadership, which is actually quite different than the education about management, right? So you can have, leaders of business and managers of business. You can have leaders of companies and managers of companies. You can have leaders of religion and managers of religion, right? There are two things. And in fact, if you're in one of these positions, you actually find yourself moving this way and moving this way all day long. There are some days when you have to be a manager. You have to get things done. You have to get them on time. You have to get them out the door. There's other days where you come in and you have to inspire people. So it isn't that you don't need both of these. It's more the fact that you should recognize that they are different sets of skills. And a true leader-manager knows how to use both of them at the right time. Last question. Пожалуйста.
Вы, как у ученого, у вас есть какие-то свои интересы, как у ученого. Чем вы сейчас занимаетесь? И в процессе своей практики, вы, когда вы занимаетесь научной работой и работой в бизнесе, как вот вы, у вас все время идет параллельно, синхронно, или бывают параллельные пути?
So, my current research is actually on the design of large space systems. How we would go to the moon, how we'd go to Mars, how to design Earth-observing systems from space, how to design communication systems from space. If we look at a very large level, how Russia and the United States and Europe would work together on one of these things, and how to allow decision makers in governments to make more effective decisions about these. So it actually has nothing to do with business at all. My scientific work has nothing to do with business. But at many universities around the world, including some in Russia, you find that some fraction of professors are interested also in working on, let's say, practical business-related problems. And the common rule in the US and in Europe is that professors are allowed to spend up to 20% of their time outside the university working on whatever they want to work on. So some write books, some start companies, some help advise government. So all of the work that I've done in starting these companies has always been in parallel. It's always been on my one day a week when I was not doing my scientific work. Well, thank you all for coming tonight.